What's up, world? Welcome to Cage Minds. I'm your host, Micah. Today we're doing our UFC The Ultimate Fighter Season 14 finale show. The season was featured by the bantamweights and featherweights. It was Team Bisping versus Team Mayhem. And for the first time in 9 seasons, the coaches will meet on the finale itself instead of on a pay-per-view a couple weeks later. This is also going to be the last season for The Ultimate Fighter being on Spike TV. It's going to move and transition over to their deal now with Fox, so it'll be on FX. Last live event for Spike, so this should be a special one. They're going to go out with a bang, probably, the UFC. They've had a great partnership. The season Ultimate Fighter, like I said, was featured by bantamweights and featherweights, so we'll have the finales from those 2 seasons tournaments to get into the UFC with the $100,000 contract. So high stakes. All the preliminary bouts are contestants from this past season. So we'll get right to the 6 preliminaries, and there's 4 main card fights. We'll get right to it. The first one, Brian Kid Lightning Caraway, who's 15-6. We'll do battle with Dustin the Beast Nice, who is 23-17-1. So just from saying the records out there, you see that Nice has an experience advantage with his bouts within the octagon. Caraway himself representing Team Alpha Male. Nice with the Hitman group. We know that they're both primarily coming from a grappling background. Caraway feels most comfortable with the grappling, a little hesitant to strike, and has somewhat of a confidence factor from what we've seen on The Ultimate Fighter. Nice, more willing to strike, not a beautiful, pure striker, but more willing to exchange and trade. A good submission guy, 18 career submission victories versus, though, 11 career losses to the submission. So this fight could go either way. I believe that confidence factor, that Nice feels confident in his skills, will play a factor. If Caraway can't get over this, he'll definitely lose. But I feel that it's going to be enough, and the willingness to exchange that Nice has over Caraway will lead to the split decision victory for Dustin Nice. So the second prelim is Steven Super Siller, who's 18-9, taking on Josh the Gentleman Clopton, who's 6-0-1. Clopton did not actually win his preliminary fight to get into the house. He lost to Dustin Nice, but the UFC saw something within him to bring him back for this finale. He trains with the Scrap Pack. He's going to be at about a 4-inch height disadvantage to Siller, who's Super, and I think that Super will use his length advantage, that reach advantage, set up the kicks. Also very good within the clinch and has a nice submission background and pedigree of his own. So I could see the grappling of each other being nullified. Also, I like the height and the range to be used within that clinch. I think this fight goes to the decision. I think Siller will have just more weapons, more answers, will be more well used from this past time that he's been in the house, because it's been a tendency for people on the show to up their level, up their training, up their par of their game in mixed martial arts once they're entering the UFC from that house. So we'll see if that holds true from a guy that didn't make it into the house to a guy that did. Moving on to the third prelim, Roland Delamore, who is 6-1, will take on Josh Ferguson, who's 7-3. Delamore beat Ferguson's brother to get into the house. So Ferguson coming in with a chip in his shoulder, a little more anger than focus. I don't like that kind of anxiety going into the fight, that kind of angst. You're trying to get back a loss for your brother. You seem a little unfocused. Josh Ferguson is going to be our first case of a fighter in this who's fighting at bantamweight, who, as Joe Rogan would say, is not probably at their best potential weight class. He'd be better suited to be a flyweight, 125 pounds. We'll see if the evolution in the UFC, if they're building that weight class too alone with this bantamweight. But right now, he's at bantamweight. He's going to be the smaller fighter. Unless he's able to use his speed, get in and out, I don't know if he'll be successful with anything. He's going to be at a disadvantage with that height, with the strength, and I don't think he's going to be good with the submissions. I see this going to the ground, and I'm going to give Delamore, I think he'll win with the first round rear naked choke. I think we're going to see this fight get to the ground, and he'll just be overpowering with his size and his skill. Next fight is Dustin the Disciple Peg, who's 10-5, taking on John Prince Albert, who's 6-1. Prince Albert was on Count Bisping's team. I guess they had a monarchy going there or something with all the royalty. But back to the fight. Peg is the taller fighter, has a reach advantage. This is primarily looks like from a kickboxer to more of a Muay Thai boxer. We didn't see a lot of elbows from Prince, but we did from the Disciple. I think that if Peg is able to use his clinch, his elbows, his knees, he's more confident in his skills. He seems to have matured on this show a lot more than Prince Albert, who was powerful and decisive in his win to get into the house, but then seemed to be scared of the speed and the dual threat ability of John Dodson. I think there's some mental butterflies kind of from the big stage shown from Prince Albert, so I'm going to give a unanimous decision prediction towards Dustin Peg, thinking that he's going to use a lot more knees, the tie clinch, elbows, and kicks. Next prelim is Marcus, the Bama Beast Brimage, who's 3-1, versus Stephen Big Fish Bass, who's 10-0. Marcus Brimage, heavy hands, hurts when he hits you, knockout caliber power with one shot. Big potential in this division with that kind of impact, explosiveness, but a lack of experience, grappling ability, and possibly composure. I think that Bass is going to be able to use this, get the fight to the ground where he ultimately has the advantage, use position, and probably end up getting Brimage to try to wiggle out, give up his back. We'll see a rear naked choke submission also. I think that Bass, with some maturity, more fights under his belt, and that solid core of a ground game, will expose Brimage and get the submission victory. But Brimage has that knockout ability at any time if he catches you. Next fight is Luis Goodnight Galantino, who's 5-1, versus Brutal Johnny Bedford, who's 17-10-1. And this is the last of our prelim fights. I see in this fight, again, another case of a guy that could potentially be fighting at the flyweight division in Goodnight, as Brutal Bedford is 5'10". He's one of our larger bantamweights. He's going to use that reach advantage. He's going to use the kicks. He also has, I think, a straight takedown wrestling advantage, but it's up to the striking if he can get in or out, if he can hit him in a scramble, if he can catch him, as Bedford likes to hang his head high. There is another potential chance for a knockout from Goodnight. He can name his hands sleeve tight if he can do the job. But Bedford, more complete fighter, more well-rounded fighter. I think he dragged us into deep waters. He's going to hit, move, take down, use elbows, jump off, just completely confuse the younger fighter. And I think Bedford gets a unanimous decision victory. This takes us up to the main card, where Tony El Kukui Ferguson, who's 13-2, and a former Ultimate Fighter alumni winner, will do battle with MMA pioneer, veteran Eve Edwards, who's 41-17-1. Ferguson destroyed his first two competitors so far in the UFC. He broke Aaron Riley's jaw. Aaron Riley, another MMA pioneer, had some great battles back in the day with Edwards. Eve Edwards is great at examining his opponent, finding a weakness, and exploiting it. He's got to get the fight to the ground and be successful against Ferguson, or in the deep waters even against Ferguson. Ferguson has a very long reach, uses the jab, and then ends with a knockout blow from a hook or an uppercut. That's the formula. That's the way I predict him getting a second-round TKO. But what's interesting to see is if Edwards can play the game, use the head movement, use some kicks to take away the mobility, drag the fight into deep waters, put Ferguson on his back where we haven't seen him. Those are the potentials for Edwards to beat Ferguson. If it does happen, that's the formula and the recipe. But I think we see a knockout, just too powerful of a striker. This takes us to now the bantamweight final from Ultimate Fighter Season 14, where TJ Dillashaw, who's 5-0, will take on the Magician, John Dodson, who's 12-5. Dillashaw, a member of Team Alpha Male, Dobson, a member of Team Jackson. Dillashaw primarily uses his wrestling. He leans back, he takes that, that's his safety blanket. If he gets in trouble, he dies for his wrestling. Dodson is just as fast. This will be an essence of a Demetrius Johnson fight. Both men will look like they're on fast forward as the fight is happening live. Dodson's going to use his striking, his faster, more confident, more skillful hands, punish Dillashaw on the takedowns, sprawl out, potentially end the fight with a TKO, but I think Dillashaw is going to be able to survive, grab a leg, survive the round, and we see a John Dodson unanimous decision victory. That takes us to the co-main event, the featherweight Season 14 finale, where Diego Brandao, who's 18-7, will do battle with Dennis the Menace Bermudez, who is 8-2. Brandao has been a wrecking machine at 145 pounds. I believe he'll be a force and a factor, and Brandao is just going to be the first official UFC victim. Bermudez wins this fight with the possibility of his wrestling, if he's able to avoid the shots, take it to the ground, ground and pound, lay on and lean on Brandao that has seemed to have some cardio problems. He's also been prone to knockout. So if you can get the ground and pound and possibly land a vicious shot, that could be the recipe right there for Bermudez to become Ultimate Fighter 14 champion. But I see that going to Brandao. He's too vicious, he's too fast with his hands, and I see this happening with a flying knee as Bermudez comes in for a takedown when he's tired, probably as they're in a scramble with Brandao running after him while he's throwing fists. He'll fly at him, land a knee with the head down, and I'm thinking it's going to be in the first round a TKO towards the end of it, about the 4-minute mark. This leads us to the two coaches fighting, the main event of the show, Michael the Count Bisping, 22-3, versus Jason Mayhem Miller, who's 24-7. Michael Bisping wins this fight using cardio, using movement, and outpointing Miller. He's knocked out opponents before and finished them off with strikes, but I don't think he has the capacity or really the strength with the technique to do that to Mayhem, who has a very solid jaw, who's only been knocked out by a soccer kick from Frank Trigg. Mayhem is the more superior grappler, the better submission artist, practitioner, and even coach from what we saw in the season. Also, he's bringing the old Shooto Box coach, Rafael Cordero, to work with him on his Muay Thai. He has Krzysztof Sosinski working with his strength and stamina workout regimen, and Mark Munoz to work with him on his wrestling. So it's a straight recipe, I think, that Mayhem Miller comes out and surprisingly will stand with Michael Bisping for the first round as they'll both exchange kicks and punches. I think Mayhem will weaken the legs with the kicks, move into the clinch, get it against the cage, eventually take this fight to the ground, and around the third round I think we'll see a submission from Jason Mayhem Miller, which people will call a surprising upset over Bisping. But I think this will showcase some of the flaws that Bisping has, as a lot of the last fights he's had have been other guys willing to stand and trade with him. He hasn't had to go against the skill level of a ground specialist of Mayhem. I think Mayhem takes this in a surprise. But Bisping's recipe to win is to outpoint him. I don't see him submitting him, and I don't see him actually being able to finish the fight due to strikes. It wouldn't be a knockout. It could be maybe a defenseless accumulation of strikes, safe Mayhem gets bloodied. Those have been my predictions. We're going to go through the winners one more time that we're predicting. We got Dustin Neese with a split decision, Steve Siller with a unanimous decision, Rolando Del Mor with a rear naked choke in the first round, Dustin Pay, unanimous decision, Steven Big Fish Bass with a rear naked choke, Brutal Johnny Bedford with a unanimous decision, Tony Ferguson a second round knockout, John Dodson with a unanimous decision, Diego Brandao with a first round TKO, and Jason Mayhem Miller with third round submission. Those have been our predictions for Caged Mind. Let me know what you think. Hit us up on Twitter.